You are listening to Proof Text, a Glossa House podcast exploring Scripture and all things related to it. New episodes are released daily. For more information, check out glossahouse.com and subscribe to our channels on Spotify and YouTube. Welcome and enjoy.
Hello and welcome to Proof Text and Glossa House TV. I am Dr. Michael Halcomb, and today I have the privilege of having back on the show, on the podcast, our Mark Reisner Jr. Like me, you got a lot of names: T. Michael W. Halcomb, R.
Right,
Mark
yeah.
Reisner Jr. And then at some point, you may have to add a doctor to that, which makes it more confusing. I don't know. We'll see. I don't know if is the doctorate thing, is that in your sights?
Yeah, I think it would be great. Just kind of focusing on what the next steps are, looking at masters right now, and then kind of just going through that, and then maybe seeing what happens after that. But I think it's a goal of mine to do that. I think it would be good. So.
Right on. I love the background you got there with the Glossa House books up top, and then the Air Jordans down below.
Oh,
Very
yeah.
nice. Very nice touch. It's a good background.
Thank you.
So you've been on the podcast before, on the show before, but people may not realize or remember who you are. So
Yeah, it
tell
was
us,
a while ago.
and also new people, are always watching, so they may have not caught the past episode. So tell us who you are. You have all these names. Which one do you go by? That sort of thing. Where are you at? What do you do? What are you up to?
Yeah, so I go by Mark for people who know me, but I had to pick a name that I wanted to go on that Psalms book that I did with Carmen Imes when we published it, and I wanted to just do Mark Reisner, but there's another Bible scholar named Mark Reisner, and then everybody would think that I'm him, or if I put the junior, because my dad and I have the same name, then they would think like I'm his son. So then I was like, okay, well, maybe I could just put like the R in front of it. And then, she was like, okay, that sounds good too. I just wasn't sure what to do. So I just went with that. And then, because Mark is what I've been called my whole life. So I think that I'd have wanted that on the book. So yeah, but I'm at Biola University right now studying biblical languages major. And so I'm going into my last year of undergrad as a senior, and the accelerated master's program allows you to kind of do, so I did all the Hebrew with a cross grad. So if I were to go get like an Old Testament master's degree, I can kind of skip through all the Hebrew and then get to just the core and the elective classes. So it allows you to kind of do multiple holes in one. So it was a really great program, and I'm super thankful for Biola to be able to do that. So yeah, just doing Hebrew, and so that's where I am now.
As you've been going through your program, do you have peers, colleagues, students like you who are as sort of hungry about like the languages and biblical studies as you are? I mean, that's kind of rare, I think, to see an undergrad student. You have them roll through every now and then, but really from like a professor perspective, it's kind of rare to see someone who's so eager to be working with the languages. Do you have other students that are like that, or is it kind of just you?
Yeah, I think most people, a lot of people do just kind of want to get through it. I think it depends on what degree you're doing. If you're trying to do an MDiv, you're gonna like the languages, but you might not. It might not be your focus as much. But if you're kind of going as a biblical languages like track, and you're doing Hebrew and you're doing Greek, a lot of people just love it. And there's a lot of people at Biola. It's like a super special community. There's a lot of people who are just really passionate, and I really like that about Biola, that I haven't experienced in some other places that I've been. So yeah.
Great. So I've been doing these episodes called Lost to Found, and this is where I just like hear Christians' stories. They're testimonies in a way and I tend to move in like three phases through these life before Christ, so BC, and then when Christ found you or got a hold of you, and then what life has been like since. Now, for a lot of people, they that I've talked to so far, they don't even remember a BC era in their lives, like a life before Christ. They had believing parents and were raised in the church. So let's go back for you. What do you remember a time like before Christ, or maybe a better question? Do you remember a time if you remember a moment when Christ got a hold of you? Do you remember what life was like before that?
Yeah, I don't really. I think in kindergarten, I think was when I kind of was putting things together that I wanted to give my life to Jesus. And so I grew up in a private Christian school and a Christian home, and I'm really thankful for that. But certainly my faith has grown in different ways and different pathways since then. So yeah, I mean, in kindergarten, I think is when I first kind of remember doing it, and
Mm,
then through first grade and second grade. Yeah, so it's been, and I loved the Old Testament as a kid too, like the Prince of Egypt movie.
right.
I was obsessed with that movie as a kid, and I think that that's part of my whole life. What made me want to go into biblical
Mm,
studies is my parents were just like, "Look, you've just been interested in this your whole life, so biblical studies is like it doesn't even feel like work to me. It's just
right.
doing like I'm just doing it for the fun of it." And then hopefully you can make some money.
Wow. Very cool. All right. So you grew up in a Christian household. What was that like? Like, did you guys have routines, rituals? Like did you have siblings? What was it like in your family growing up?
Yeah, I grew up as an only child for a little bit, and then my brothers were born, and they were twins.
Oh,
So yeah, so I have two twin brothers that are younger,
they're still twins, though.
and I
You
think
said they were
mostly.
twins. They're still twins.
Oh yeah, so when they yeah, so yeah, I think mostly like going to school was the biggest thing for me because that's you spend so much of your day
Yeah.
there. I mean, you're there almost all day. And your homework is also Bible too.
Mm,
Um, so going to school, I think, was the biggest thing for me, and like chapel every Thursday. Yeah.
okay.
So and Bible class and yeah. So
Did you guys? I assume you went to church on Sundays. Did you get involved
yes,
in
yeah.
youth eventually? And um, yeah, what did that look like?
Yeah, I mean, I was involved in church and youth group. I like the Wednesday night Bible studies and the Sunday. Yeah, it was really good. Um, and I played hockey growing up actually,
Okay.
so that was a lot of traveling, which was really hard.
Mm,
It was hard to make it to church all the time. Um,
mm.
but yeah, I mean, it was a lot of travel, so like all across the country and Canada, and yeah, so.
Did you guys did your parents did you have like a did you pray before meals? Did you read scripture? Did you like what kind of things were going on in terms of like nurturing the faith, especially if you weren't able to make it to church? What kind of did you have little rituals like that?
Yeah, I mean, we definitely pray before meals, yeah, and things like that. And my dad would, we would always listen to worship music in the car on the way to school. There's sermons, so I think that could be the type of ritual
Right,
that we had. Yeah,
absolutely. So you mentioned kindergarten is where you sort of wanted to shift gears. Is that the moment that um like the Lord got a hold of you, or does that come down the road? Like, do you have any sort of distinct, I guess, memories?
yeah, I think I have two. I think the first one, I think it was in eighth grade when I watched the movie The Case for Christ.
Hmm.
And I remember watching that movie, and it was really influential on me, seeing that his testimony, Lee Strobel's testimony, and how he thought that the resurrection was fake, and he wanted to prove that it was not real,
Right.
as an atheist.
Right.
And then he investigated it for himself, and then he was convinced otherwise.
Okay.
So watching that was really formative for me. And then I came out of the movie theater when they screened it, and I was just like, man, I mean, Jesus, like, historically was a real figure. It's not something that I just believe like a storybook, but he's real. And that really cemented it for me to want to really dedicate my life to him. And then, in high school, things went on, and COVID hit, actually my junior and senior year of high school. So that was really hard, about to graduate and go to college, and everything was just shut down and online. I mean, man, that was tough, especially for a community in school. So my faith kind of, it wasn't in a good place at that point. I feel like I was mad at God for allowing a lot of that to happen. From my perspective, like, how could this breakout happen? And seeing all the deaths. But then I went off to college and still wanted to study Bible, because I knew that that's what I wanted to do, even though at the time I was a little bit shaky on it. And then when I came back to school, I got back plugged into a Christian community, and then that kind of put me back on my feet. Yeah. So, and then I think that's when I was exposed to the world of reading the Bible through its own context, in its ancient Near Eastern context. And then that's just when everything clicked for me, wanting to do Hebrew and go, do biblical languages. So that's kind of where it clicked for me that second time.
Do you see yourself pastoring? Do you see yourself going into ministry? Do you want to do biblical studies, like teach? Like what? Yeah. What do you envision?
Yeah, I think biblical studies, I want to keep going down that route. As long as I just keep going in a route, I think pathways can form that I might not know will happen in the future. I think we need a bridge between academia and the church. I mean, and I know you do that really well. And I think that there needs to be some type of medium, and podcasts are kind of becoming a thing right now. I know Bible Project is doing a really good job. Michael Heiser was also another scholar who his books were kind of just for the churchgoer, but he was a really high academic scholar. And I think that we need a little bit more of that. And Carmen Imes, at Biola, that we co-authored the Psalms book, her bearing God's name and being God's image, those I think are examples as well. So I think something like that would be great, or finding new pathways that maybe nobody's ever done before. I don't know.
Yeah, that's been something I've been really passionate about since, even while doing like PhD work. One of my first books, you may find this interesting. It's called Entering the Fray, something like a primer on New Testament studies for the Church and Academy. And it goes through like the 10 or 12 things that have shaped New Testament studies over the last 500 years, and sort of introduces these scholarly concepts to the church in a really sort of down-to-earth way. I think, and those are important because it's rare that, like, if you're preaching out of the Gospels, well, you have synoptic studies and the so-called synoptic problem,
right,
and the historical Jesus, versus the Christ of faith, like all these issues that have garnered airtime over the last 500 to 600 years. They affect preaching, right? Whether the person in the pew or sometimes even the preacher knows it or not, by virtue of the commentaries that are being read, for example. And so it's good to like sort of get people behind the curtain, behind the scenes, under the hood, whatever analogy you want to use, and help them, see why this is an issue and what conversations have been going on among scholars. As someone who has had one foot kept in academia, one foot kept in the church, and been very intentional about that over the last 20-ish years, I think that's very important. So I hope you'll really continue to like think about how to be a bridge between the church and academy, because the academy has largely been co-opted by society. I mean, that's why you see a lot of schools that used to be our seminary, like the Ivies,
Right.
Harvard, for example.
Right.
The divinity school doesn't even represent what we could truly call a divinity school anymore. And a lot of our seminaries have gone that route, and our Bible colleges, and so our churches. There's an old saying that says, as goes the seminary, so goes the minister. As goes the minister, so goes the church. As goes the church, so goes society. The idea being that if we look at society right now and ask, why is it the way it is, that we can follow the chain back to our seminaries. And I think there's a lot of truth in that.
Yes.
So yeah, I hope you'll continue to think about that. So you've talked a little bit too about what life has been like since those like two sort of profound moments, really three. You have the kindergarten, the 8th grade, and then the high school or college one where you get back involved with the group. And so what has life been like since that last moment? You've talked about being at Bible college, but yeah, you're doing independent studies and language work and publishing and all sorts of cool stuff. As an undergrad, none of that would have ever been on my radar, I don't think. So I think it's a bit unique. Talk a little bit about that.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, coming to Biola and just studying theological education, I had a little bit of it in high school, so I felt a little prepared to do it. And I just started out my first year, and I felt like a whole world just opened up to me. Growing up in, an evangelical conservative school, you're not taught everything that there is to know. I mean, they don't have time, and it's also a little bit biased towards that group. And when I came to Biola, it's Protestant, but they're not affiliated with any tradition. So I was getting, professors that are Anglican priests that are, or Protestant or any different denominations, Baptists, some maybe more Pentecostal leaning, and learning a lot from different traditions and denominations has really grown me, I think, in seeing a different world. Like, for an example, when I took a theology class my first year or second year, I learned about different atonement theories, and I realized that penal substitution isn't the only atonement theory.
Right.
And I was like, what? Yeah. And that was a really big thing for me, realizing that there's a lot more to Christianity, and Christendom is a lot wider than I ever expected it to be.
Yeah.
So that's kind of my journey. And then really the ancient Near Eastern context is what drove me. My first year, we had this 3-hour, this was a turning point for me. We had this 3-hour class, and my friend and I were sitting in this class, and we just needed a break. We were like, man, it was kind of long. And we were just like, hey, let's just step outside for a second and take a break and then come back. And then I remember he told me, he was like, did you know that the Bible translators are trying to camouflage the Bible? And I'm like, what are you talking about? Camouflage the Bible? And he's like, yeah, look at this. And then he pulls up the NIV version, or I think it was NIV, I can't remember which one, of Deuteronomy 32:8. And then he pulls up the NASB, and then one of them says according to the number of the sons of Israel, and the other says according to the number of the sons of God. And it was a different manuscript. It was a textual variant, and I didn't know what those were, my first year. And I was like, what is this? And then he's like, yeah, you need to read this book called The Unseen Realm by Michael Heiser. And then I was like, okay. And then I picked it up and I read it. And then he started talking about ancient Near Eastern context and reading the Bible. So Michael Heiser was kind of my introduction to academia and reading the Bible through ancient Near Eastern context in general. So when he started talking about like ancient Mesopotamia and ancient Egypt and reading through the lens of an ancient Israelite, that just totally clicked for me. And I was like, reading it through my own tradition and seeing all these different traditions, I'm like realizing that not everything from my own tradition is true, or I could at least question it and then come back, and then if I'm convinced of it, keep it. But reading the Bible through its own lens, historical lens, was the biggest thing for me.
Yeah. Wow. So Mike Heiser put out lots of really good stuff. He passed
Yes.
recently.
Yeah.
Well, I guess it's been a year or so, but he did a lot of great work, and I think very similar for me. I went all through Bible college, my whole undergrad. It wasn't until my MDiv, I was in a bookstore for the seminary I was at, that I stumbled across the clearance rack, and on the clearance rack was these New Testament commentaries. There were social science commentaries on the New Testament by like Bruce Molina and John Pilch, and so their whole thing was that the New Testament in its sort of social world, social context,
Yeah.
looking at things like honor,
It changes everything.
honor and shame,
Yeah.
kinship, purity, and
Yes.
that was the game changer moment for me when I came across
Yes.
those.
So it sounds like a similar story.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was a moment. You said use the language of like things clicked. That was a moment where things really clicked for me and set me on a sort of trajectory that I wouldn't have probably gone on otherwise. So
Yeah.
it's amazing how just even a little bit of study of the ancient worlds and the ancient contexts shed light on passages that we otherwise think we have nailed down, and that we've been
Yes.
familiar with, and that we've heard our whole lives, or at least for a while. And context can completely just change all of that in a moment.
Yeah.
Have
That's
there
great. I love it.
as we sort of wrap up here, have there been any well, I have two questions. One, have there been any like passages that come to mind that you're like, yeah, I used to think this way about this, but when I read it in context, it switched, or at least clarified some things for me? That if you can't think any off the top of your head, that's fine. And then the second one is, how has all this uh, sort of edified you in the faith? How's it? You have oftentimes the academic stuff. A lot of people try to compartmentalize that and separate it from the faith. I think that's a mistake. I think,
Yes.
at least in my case, I think the all the study it just strengthens my faith. So yeah, I'm curious about those two questions. Do you have any passages that your understanding has completely changed, or at least shifted a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first passages in the Bible, in Genesis, the 7 days, and the creation story, and almost the entire beginning of Genesis, I think, was changed for me. I mean, I grew up and I thought that you needed to prove it scientifically, that historically, like, it was a record of creation, that 7 days in 24 literal 7 days, 24 hour 7 literal days, like the creation happened. And then as I started to study, what did it for me was seeing how it's kind of a polemic against the Egyptian and the Mesopotamian gods.
Right.
And I was like, that is so much more awesome. And in my faith, like reading the Bible through that lens, it's like God's saying that he's a better God than these other gods. And I think that connects academy to the faith right there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So.
And in Genesis 1 too, just the Hebrew poetic elements, right, that are completely lost in English, and you realize there's a lot of poetry going on here, perhaps in Genesis 1. Oh, so how has all this strengthened your faith?
Yeah, I think reading the Bible in its own context can strengthen your faith because you're not reading in passages just from your own context or from your own life and then kind of getting what you want out of it. I think that letting the Bible on its own terms challenge you can grow yourself as a person and in your faith. And not being afraid to ask questions or challenge the Bible. I mean, God's not going to be mad,
Exactly.
if you have a question. And I love that series that you do with JM, where you just ask all the questions, and then I'm at the end of the video, I'm like, man, that was like uncomfortable just asking all those questions with no answers.
Right.
So
Yeah.
yeah, I think that, and then I think another thing too is like with the 7-day creation. I mean, you can believe that if you want and still be a Christian. And I think kind of breaking down those barriers that you have to believe this one interpretation can actually strengthen you in the faith. I think Paul kind of talks about that and the barriers that like realizing that we're not going to all have the same interpretation, even if we think there is one right one in its context. That can be a maturing in the faith, I think.
Yeah, well, man, I appreciate you taking the time out today to share, and glad you're working with Glosa House. I'm glad we
Thank you. Glad to
we
be
have
with
you on the team, and
Yeah.
you have some other projects in the mix, in the works for Glosa House, and we're thrilled to have you on the team. And for those of you out there watching or listening, if you have ideas for projects, get in touch with us. Let us know. You don't have to be a doctorate or a PhD. Good content's good content. Or if you're out there watching or listening and you're like, man, I have a testimony to share, get in touch with me, editors@glosahouse.com, and we'll have you come on and share your story. But yeah, so check out glosahouse.com. Check out the books that Mark has done with us, and there are more to come. And check out Proof Text, the podcast, and Glosa House TV, our YouTube channel. So, Mark, man, it's good to see you. Thanks for coming on.
Good to see you too.
Blessings to you the rest of your summer, and as you wind up your studies there, and look ahead to what's next. And friends, thank you for watching and listening. We're going to stop there and say we hope that helps.
Interested in growing your ancient language skills but not sure where to start? Glosa House can help. From illustrated readers and short stories to lexicons and grammars, Glosa House offers a variety of resources for beginning, intermediate, and experienced ancient language learners. Head to glosahouse.com today. Glosa House, language resources for the global community.